Hi guys, my name is Anthony Broderick and I'm the co-founder of Fragments. Today I'm going to tell you a story about a journey of decentralized finance and decentralized governance. The reason that I'm doing it simultaneously is, for me, they're two sides of the same coin. Decentralized finance needs decentralized governance for its journey of progressive decentralization. As it is successful, it needs to progressively decentralize to make sure that the trust assumptions are minimized and that the whole ecosystem is safe. Whether you like it or not, decentralized finance is the killer use case for decentralized governance at the moment. And so in my mind, they work together in unity and are completely codependent. This all began back in 2015, with the launch of Ethereum. When Ethereum first launched, the big innovation that it brought to the forefront was smart contracts. Smart contracts are the if this, then that kind of logic, where you can start programming in very complex technical calls to one another. The two main applications for this were DAOs and DeFi. Being able to take these traditional structures that were used both for governance and in finance and be able to put them democratically into the hands of the people in an opt-in system. Everything's open source, everything's participatory, nothing is forced. The first things that started coming out of this revolution were experiments like MakerDAO and Aragon. MakerDAO was the perfect embodiment of the unity of decentralized finance and decentralized governance because the MKR token was used as the way to mediate and manage all the stakeholders for the underlying stablecoin DAI. This was largely a success, and MakerDAO is still here today. This was the same with Aragon. Aragon built out the first general purpose governance toolkit where people could come, build their own DAOs for their own use cases, and through that experimentation, there was a lot of collective knowledge learned about what works and what doesn't, which then brought us into the next phase of the evolution of the ecosystem. At that point, we started entering the growth and optimism stage from 2020 to 2021. This really culminated in DeFi summer, where you had projects like Aave, Uniswap, Compound, all coming online, and for the first time, bringing product market fit at scale for the DeFi ecosystem. But again, this was in tandem completely with decentralized governance. They all launched their own governance tokens, for example, Uni, Compound, and Aave. And this was, again, when you first started to see DAOs come to the mainstream. There was a lot of money flooding into the system at that time, which is why it's called the DeFi summer. Everyone was getting rich on these coins. And that was really the peak for a while, because what followed was less pretty. At that point, the market started to rug, everything went down, you know, the FTX scandals, all of the hopium and all the excitement faded away, and what we were left with was a pretty bleak prospect with products that were very insular to the Web3 economy and DAOs that were not really functional in any scalable term of uses of the term. As well as that, we started seeing the proliferation of alternative ecosystems, both Alt L1s, EVM, L2s, and now L3s. Now, this is amazing for users because they get to choose where they want to do transactions. They're getting cheaper, obviously, as the overall bandwidth increases. And for users, it's great to an extent. But the problem is, for projects that want to scale across chains, how do they actually do that? It's becoming more difficult to be able to deploy your contracts, manage your contracts, mediate between liquidity, between users. And this is a problem that's set to proliferate as our friend ZK Lumi over here, who work at ZK Sync, with all these L3s that are coming online, which are coming on in a couple months' time. You know, there's going to be hundreds of ecosystems that need to be conquered and managed and have thriving ecosystems. So when looking at the solutions, what do we really have available? For me, I think the first thing is modular architecture. Obviously, modular architecture stands in opposition to monolithic. The beautiful thing about modular architecture is that as the whole ecosystem evolves, you can swap out individual components of your organization instead of scrapping the whole thing and starting again every time something new happens. This is obviously very important in an ecosystem that is so rapidly evolving as it is in Web3. Next thing is smart contract aggregation. One of the biggest problems I see, specifically in decentralized governance, is that everybody thinks that they have the way to bring about utopia in decentralized governance. So they scrap all the previous standards. They start everything from ground zero. But the problem is this is very complex technologies. And starting from zero, which is often what they do, they die along the way, even though they had noble pursuits. So for me, what you need to be doing is looking at, OK, what has worked in the wild, not in your mind, building on top of that truth, and then from there, iterating and innovating. But it's important to have a smart aggregation approach as opposed to starting everything again. Also, sometimes it makes sense to aggregate, sometimes it makes sense to innovate, and sometimes it makes sense to have partnerships. So sometimes, because of the level of specialization of some of the projects in the ecosystem, you really should be creating technology partnerships. Obviously, they should be trusted. Obviously, they should be the best. But it really is the best way to move forward at speed as an ecosystem and as an individual project. Finally, obviously, because there's so many different chains, you have to have cross-chain functionality. You have to have some kind of bridging mechanism. What you want is trust-minimized bridging, because we know what the opposite of that is. It's when you have big honeypots of liquidity locked in these bridges, and billions of dollars have been stolen over the last couple of years. Finally, you want to have unified governance, because at the moment, if you have on-chain governance on one chain and you want to grow, the problem is that every time you go to a new chain, you're creating second-class citizens who do not have the on-chain voting rights, which is obviously terrible for bringing all the stakeholder input, which is what your project thrives on and is necessary to be able to deal with the ever-evolving environment. So what I propose is reinventing cross-chain DeFi without compromise. What does that actually look like? Well, for us, it looks like Fragments. Fragments is a platform where we find the leading smart contract innovations from around the ecosystem, we fork them, we bring them on the platform, we put them behind a no-code UI, and let every DAO every DeFi project that wants to scale go cross-chain very easily. You can build, manage, and scale any DeFi project, no coding required, everything's out of the box, just a few clicks, it's just a few minutes. As you can see here through the demo, we have the first on-chain, cross-chain voting mechanic in the industry. We have the first quadratic voting with Sybil resistance in the industry. And we have the first on-chain, cross-chain quadratic voting with Sybil resistance, obviously. As well as that, as well as having the voting, there's a few things to the journey here. If you come to us as a DeFi project, you want to scale, we deploy your token contracts to all these different chains. We get your tokens on those chains, so now you exist on these chains. And then what we have to do is also bootstrap your liquidity in decentralized exchanges, because if you don't have liquidity, then you've got no chance of being able to withstand someone selling, a couple $100,000 of your token. So we use our bonding engine, which is the first bonding mechanic to be Uniswap v3 compatible, to bootstrap liquidity, to bootstrap TVL and users, and to diversify your treasury. So first we get you to the chains, then we get you liquidity, then we get you users, TVL, and diversify your treasury. We also need to be able to bridge your assets, obviously. So that's where we're working with our partner, Connext, who has invented a technology standard called the XERC20. Instead of locking millions of dollars into these liquidity bridges, what they do is they burn your token on chain A, they mint your token on chain B, and all they're sending in between is a message to mediate between the mint and burn function. Because there's no liquidity locked there, there's nothing to be stolen in the case of a hack. So this is the next generation of bridging, and all of our users get whitelisted by default because of the partnership. Finally, as I mentioned in relation to the governance, all of our projects out of the box are cross-chain enabled for all voting. So if you want to go to 30 different EVM chains, it doesn't matter how many chains or which EVMs you go to, all of your users from any single chain can vote, have that vote count. We pass that through Connext down to the original chain where the governor contract is. Everything can be committed, everything can be submitted, and then it can trigger execution if the proposal passes. So there's a few industry firsts in there, and the alpha of the product is now complete. We're now moving into our private beta. The exciting thing that I get to mention today is that we're doing a pilot project with Gitcoin once we're all ready. One thing I will move on to is, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it makes sense to fork, sometimes it makes sense to innovate, sometimes it makes sense to integrate. The reason we've been able to build such a rich feature environment so quickly is that we've been relying largely on forking what works and also these partners. So I mentioned Connext and the XERC20 standard. These guys are the next generation of bridging. We're very impressed by them, and we're working very closely with them. Also, when it comes to governance, we've heard about Aave, Compound, Uniswap today. All of them use Tally by default, and we could come along and try and build a competitor and try and make it more feature-rich, more efficient. But ultimately, these guys are doing a pretty good job at what they do. So we partner with Tally, we're working with them, we download all of the DAOs from Tally, all their proposals. All we're doing is sitting on top of it as the cross-chain layer to facilitate cross-chain governance. Finally, we've integrated with Gitcoin Passport to provide Sybil resistance for the voting implementations. Right now, we're bringing quadratic voting, and if anyone's not familiar, normally the voting mechanic is one token, one vote, meaning that if you have a million tokens, you have a million votes. The problem is if you have a million tokens and the next biggest person has 10,000 tokens, you're going to run the whole show. Quadratic voting is when you take a square root of the token amounts in each of the wallets, and they're allowed to vote only by the square root. So it massively reduces the inequality between the everyday participant and the whales. The problem is that you can game the system by sending all these funds around all these different wallets, and then you can kind of circumvent it. So to stop that, we've integrated with Gitcoin's Passport, which is the best Sybil-resistant technology, which means that they have the best way to prove that you are one person behind one wallet, not one person behind 30 wallets. So that really kind of covers most of the content that I wanted to say. One thing that I want to mention is that we are accepting applications to our private beta. As I say, Gitcoin is our first client, but we're also working with some DeFi protocols. If anyone's in here that is interested or know anyone that might be interested, please do reach out. Thank you.
Any questions? Does anybody have any questions?
I got a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. Just a quick question about the bridging, and you were saying that there's less vulnerabilities because it's just a message.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there like any vulnerability for replay attacks just resending that particular message? Is there any kind of vulnerabilities that you kind of have sensed already?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they've already had, I think they've already had $150 million of funds move through the bridges. They're not the most prominent in terms of branding, but they are the most advanced in terms of the technology. I mean, a replay attack is a pretty obvious attack vector, and they've had no issues so far, so I don't think so.
Fantastic.
I have a business question, actually. The business model, if you can a little bit elaborate.
Sure. We're working on a fee-based model. So obviously we're working with our bridge provider Connects, who take a fee. We take a fee on top of the fee. Now you can circumvent that, and you can go to their own bridging UIs and get your own token whitelisted, but it's a very complicated process. And the way that the analogy that I use is that, if, for example, you can go to MetaMask's own DEX aggregator. Now they charge a hefty fee, and you could just go to Uniswap, but they make a hell of a lot of money because it's in your wallet. So that's like one of the ways. We also make fees from the bonding engine, which is how they generate users, liquidity, TVL, etc. We have a progressive like tax system, so the first $10,000 is free. So we only win if you win. The more money you make, the higher the fee becomes to kind of, to share in the joy. But yeah, it's basically just a fee-based model where we can take fees. We can. Right now, we're not charging for voting because we want to incentivize, better voting, cross-chain, quadratic, all that stuff. But at some point, there will be some business model behind that.
Thanks.
All right, one more round of applause.